All right, so here we go. We're going to talk about anxiety disorders and obsessive compulsive disorders. So there's a lot of things that go into this. You see some down at the bottom there: generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, phobia, post-traumatic stress disorder, OCD, hoarding disorder, which that's kind of a new one to the DSM-5, and then body dysmorphic. So let's talk about anxiety first. First, people misuse the word anxiety all the time. Some people say that they're like anxious, and it almost use it like it means anticipating, right? And that's not what it means at all. Anxious, if you're saying feeling anxious about something, it means you're feeling some anxiety about an upcoming situation. So anxiety is just this general state of dread or uneasiness that a person feels in the result to a real or imagined danger. So we're going to put a lot of different things into this category of anxiety disorders. The most common one is generalized anxiety disorder. A lot of times you'll see that abbreviated GAD, and that's just this general state of dread or uneasiness. Remember what we talked about last time that affects your everyday life. That's kind of a big thing with defining psychological disorders. Couple common things about anxiety disorders: usually the fear is out of proportion. Sometimes the fear is not realistic at all. Think about some phobias that are just not realistic at all as far as like being afraid of things, you guys that are afraid of clowns or whatever. Constant worrying, sudden mood swings, and then you're going to have a lot of physical symptoms. So especially when we talk about anxiety disorders like panic disorder, you're going to see a lot of physical symptoms like tightening of the chest, trouble breathing, a lot of those things, muscle tightness, headaches, fatigue, that kind of stuff. So let's dive right into this. We're going to hit phobias first. So phobias are intense and irrational fears of a particular object or situation. So, man, if you guys go to like phobialist.com on the internet, it is just chocked full of crazy, ridiculous phobias you would never have any idea of. I gave you some examples right here. The most common one is probably fear of public places, fear of being out in open space. We call that agoraphobia. That's one the book really wants you to know. That's one the AP test really wants you to know. So know about agoraphobia. I'll cover that in a second. Fear of imperfection, fear of ants, fear of ghosts, fear of eyes, fear of thunder, fear of almost anything. Like I said, you go on phobialist.com and it's just like ridiculous how many different phobias are listed there with scientific names for each one of them. Which one example is like the phobia of long words is like a 32-letter word, which somebody had some fun with that. So in many cases, phobias are reinforced because you get into this cycle of like you're afraid of something, so you avoid it. Therefore, you never face your fear, which is actually the way to get over them, and it just continues that way, right? You avoid it, you never face it, so you continue to be afraid of it, and it just keeps going. So actually, one of the things that is a great treatment for phobias is facing your fear, actually coming into contact with things you're afraid of, to a lot of times show you that they're not anything that you should be afraid of. Like I said, the biggest one that you guys need to know of specifically in this phobia list is agoraphobia, an anxiety disorder in which a person has attacks of intense fear and anxiety, and there's a fear of being in places where it's hard to escape and where you might not be able to escape easily or where help might not be available. So think about huge public places, like if you go to the state fair or if you go to like a Colts game, just being in that huge public space with people all around you and not being able to get out of it easily is agoraphobia. Panic disorder. Panic disorders are really easy to diagnose because you can't have panic disorders without panic attacks. So you guys have mostly seen panic attacks before in movies or television shows. And there's a variety of physical symptoms, right? Most of them has to do with breathing, right? A sense that you're choking, a sense that you're suffocating, a sense that you can't catch your breath. A lot of times your breath gets out of control. You hyperventilate, which that can cause, passing out. That could cause death, right? But choking, fainting, dizziness, just a sick feeling in your stomach, so nausea, and chest pain. Almost feels like somebody's sitting on your chest is how a lot of people that have panic attacks describe them. So like you see with panic disorder, panic attacks are the main symptom. So, think about the DSM, right? This DSM again, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. You're not going to be able to have panic disorder without the symptom of panic attacks, okay? So here's an example of some common phobias or fears that we went over in class and like how common they are. But now think about fear versus phobia, right? Is it enough to disrupt your everyday life? Maybe you don't like heights, but you don't go around every day thinking about being in high places and it doesn't like affect your everyday life, right? So then look at the much lower percentages of actual phobias, right? There's a lot of people that are afraid of heights, And if they were asked to go up into a water tower or a fire tower or something, they wouldn't do it. But they don't go around every single day thinking about it, right? It doesn't affect their everyday life. That is when it may become a phobia, a psychological disorder. Let's move on to another anxiety disorder. A lot of you guys are familiar with this one too, post-traumatic stress disorder. If I asked you, who commonly has PTSD, you'd probably mention veterans of war, veterans of military combat. You might mention some people outside of that, like maybe people who are domestic abuse survivors, maybe even assault or burglary survivors, right? So sexual assault survivors, that's a big one. So this is very common with a lot of different types of people. Even disasters of, natural disasters, survivors of 9/11, survivors of a hurricane or something like that. So what happens with post-traumatic stress disorder is they relive the traumatic event. So the symptoms that you're going to see are these involuntary flashbacks, maybe reoccurring nightmares or what we call night terrors, and extreme feelings of guilt, especially when you talk to some of these people who are sexual assault or rape survivors. They have extreme feelings of guilt, even though they're the victim, right? And that doesn't make sense, but that is what they feel, right? And what we found is like the best treatment for PTSD is not a medication, it's not psychotherapy, it is group therapy. It is talking with other people who have went through a similar experience, and they feel, like they're not so alone, and they feel like there are people out there that are feeling the same way they are, and they share stories together, and that's actually one of the best type of therapies for this specific disorder. I did want to mention the term down there at the very bottom. This is a term that is in your book, and it's an interesting scenario. It's called post-traumatic growth. So sometimes when a human has trauma in their life, they respond to it with PTSD type symptoms, right? These involuntary flashbacks and reoccurring nightmares. We've also found, though, that a small percentage of people actually experience it in a very positive way. We've seen cancer survivors, for example, come out of that cancer battle, that struggle, with a renewed vigor for life. Like they value every single day that they had because they were shown, how fragile life can be and how short it can be cut. So post-traumatic growth is more of a positive feeling coming out of a traumatic event instead of the post-traumatic stress disorder that we see on this one. Now, before we get into obsessive compulsive disorder, I need you to understand that in DSM-5, this was a huge change that was made. Some of you guys actually chose this change when I asked you to look at the changes that were made in the DSM-5. Obsessive compulsive disorder was always categorized underneath anxiety disorders. DSM-5, it's separated, okay? So obsessive compulsive disorder was taken out of anxiety disorders and put into a category of its own in the DSM-5. So a compulsive person may wash their hands 20 or 30 times a day. That's what we think of when we think of OCD. We think of people who have these habitual things they have to go through every single day, these fears that they have. But let me break this down for you. Okay, here's the best way to break it down. Obsessive compulsive disorder, you have to have obsessions and compulsions, right? So let's talk about obsessions first. What is an obsession? An obsession is a thought. It is something you can't stop thinking about. So a lot of people think about getting sick all the time. A lot of people think about germs. A lot of people think about making a fool of themselves in public, or maybe even their own death, right? And they can't stop thinking about it. So that's an obsession. Obsession is a thought. Now you look at compulsion, that's different. Compulsion is an action. And a lot of times obsessions turn into compulsions, or obsessions make us have compulsions. So the obsessive person that is obsessing about germs and disease and they're going to get sick might have a compulsion of washing their hands all the time, right? They might have a compulsion of covering their hand when they touch any door handle, right? So the actions that these people are exhibiting are compulsions. So those are the things that you usually see. Sometimes they're even numberings, right? Somebody who may obsess about their safety and obsess about this thought of somebody breaking into their house and robbing them may lock their door 4 times every single day because that's something they can control, right? A lot of these things they obsess about are not something they can control. They may obsess about somebody breaking into their house. Can you control that? Well, you can set up cameras, you can have a security system, you can lock your doors and windows, but if somebody is bent on breaking into your house, they're going to break into your house. So the compulsion is, well, okay, if I can't control that, let me control something that is within my control, and that is locking your door 4 or 5 times. That is constantly checking those locks to make sure that you locked them, even though you know you did, right? So maybe it serves as a distraction from people with these irrational obsession fears. We do see that there's possibly a genetic base to OCD. We do see it run in genetics and families quite a bit. But the biggest thing from this slide I want you to take is obsessions and compulsions are different. Obsessions are thoughts, compulsions are actions. Okay. So let's look at a couple examples here, like some OCD commonalities, right? Some obsessions that people have with this disorder. You can see overwhelmingly the largest obsession that is in OCD is that concern with dirt, germs, toxins, getting sick, right? You do have symmetry, order, and exactness there, which is a lot of times what people think of also with OCD. And then also something terrible happening, somebody breaking into your house, like I mentioned earlier, fire, death, illness. Okay, what are the behaviors? Well, like I said, a lot of times the behaviors are going to match up with the obsessions. So if you have a concern for dirt, germs, and toxins as the number one obsession, what do you think the number one compulsion that's reported is going to be? Excessive hand washing, right? Bathing, toothbrushing, or grooming. So, yeah, those are some obsession and compulsion examples. Now, some other obsessive compulsive related disorders. This is a new one to the DSM-5. This has never been diagnosed on its own before. It didn't have its own diagnosis. There were people who were hoarders as a psychological disorder, to that point of hoarding, before this was put into the DSM-5. But before this, they were just diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorders, and they would say that there were hoarding tendencies, right? Well, now we have hoarding disorder added to the DSM-5. And basically, when you look at the DSM-5, what does it say as far as the diagnostic criteria? Accumulation of possessions and persistent difficulty discarding or parting with those possessions, regardless of actual value. Look, if you got like antiques that are worth a lot of money, I get why you're keeping them. But if you're stacking up like Domino's pizza boxes, like 100 boxes high because you don't want to get rid of them and you won't let anybody get rid of them, then that's a problem. That's when we're talking about hoarding disorder as a mental illness. Some of you guys have seen the A&E show Hoarders. I'm going to post an example of that after this video, just kind of like enrichment, like additional material. But I do have a clip from A&E Hoarders, and it just shows you like, they'll hoard junk. Like, it is not something that's valuable. It's not something even that has sentimental value. It's literally junk, and they have problems with parting from it. So it doesn't really make sense. And then even more into the obsessive compulsive related disorders, even more rare one here is body dysmorphic disorder. And it is this perceived defects or flaws in physical appearance where there really is none, right? So you perceive that there's a flaw in your physical appearance, but they're not really observable to others. Other people would not notice them, and you even see them as way out of proportion to what they actually are. So a lot of people who have body dysmorphic disorder will develop some kind of action that goes with it, right? Like they talk about picking, right? Picking at skin that you feel like has some kind of flaw, or picking out hairs where you don't think you should have hairs, even on your arm or something like that. So in the DSM, we talk a lot about comorbidity, right? And if something is comorbid with another disorder, that means they are related. When you see one, a lot of times you do see the other. And body dysmorphic disorder, I'm pretty sure it doesn't shock you when we're talking about the diagnostic qualities of body dysmorphic disorder, is usually comorbid with an eating disorder. Because a lot of times they do perceive themselves as being too heavy, being too fat, even though a lot of times people would look at these people and say they're not fat at all. They're not even obese, right? So body dysmorphic disorder is this perceived difference between what they perceive and reality. So I have a Dr. Phil example. Guys, I hate Dr. Phil, but I'm going to show you a Dr. Phil example because it's the best one that I could find of a girl who has body dysmorphic disorder. And you can see how the way she views herself is not reality, right? It is not the way everybody else sees her, and she overstates all of these flaws that she says she has. So that is it for today, guys. Looks like next time we'll be getting into mood disorders, depressive and bipolar disorders. Hope you guys were able to take a look at the sign today and maybe find a psychologist that was hidden in our lecture today. If you find it, or you think you find it, be sure to Canvas message me because another 5 points of extra credit will be given out for anybody that can find that little hidden psychologist name in today's lecture. So Canvas message it to me, and just like last time, I will give 5 points extra credit for the first person in every section that finds it. So you guys have a Canvas quiz that you got to take today. You only get one attempt at that thing, but there is no time limit. So make sure and take your time on it. Look up the correct answers in your book or on this presentation. All of them should be pretty clear. Any questions, please Canvas message me, or just get a hold of me as far as our conference that we're going to do through Zoom, hopefully very soon. So until next time.